So I'm delighted to introduce Rachel Murphy, who is volunteering manager at Plantlife. Rachel has worked with the National Plant Monitoring Scheme Partnership and directly with NPMS volunteers since 2019. And having over 12 years experience in managing and engaging volunteers in data standardization and coordinating national monitoring schemes, Rachel is really a very keen advocate of citizen science and the huge value that volunteers add to research and conservation. Rachel has a passion for public engagement in science and in making nature accessible to diverse audiences. Over to you, Rachel.
Hi, thank you very much. And hi all, thank you so much for joining the session. As Julia has said, I've had the absolute pleasure of working with NPMS volunteers for nearly 7 years now. And it's an absolute delight to be able to speak to you at today's celebration. Definitely worthy of the joint party hat that I have added to our logo there, as we celebrate the ongoing dedication and efforts of our fabulous volunteer community. I actually came across a phrase in a recent study of national volunteer managers that I thought really hit the nail on the head when it comes to schemes like the NPMS, and that is that the contribution of the volunteer community is mission critical. So at the risk of repeating sentiments made elsewhere today, I think it's worth being really clear that the large scale and the systematic approach required by this long-term nationwide scheme would simply not be possible without the input and the enthusiasm of a wide and diverse volunteer pool. As Jane mentioned earlier, just in the first 10 years of the scheme, we've seen a huge contribution thanks to the volunteer efforts. And we're really committed to working with volunteers to maximise the accessibility and the impact of the scheme and ensuring that the NPMS and indeed plant monitoring as a whole is inclusive and welcoming to a diverse audience. It's really important that our commitment to diversity, equity and inclusion isn't tokenistic, but rather we actually want botanical monitoring to be inclusive and as accessible as possible to all, with our DEI considerations threaded through every aspect of our work programme and our delivery. And indeed, the NPMS and its partner organisations are active members of the UK TPOP, which Jane introduced in her introduction. And at the start of this year, the UK TPOP partners actually published a joint statement called Nature for All that pledges our commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion in species monitoring schemes. And together we're working to build and support inclusive schemes that really reflect our society and strengthen our conservation efforts. But of course, in order to do that, we need baseline information about the people engaging with our scheme. And we also want to make sure there's opportunity for our volunteers to share with us and to capture their volunteer feedback. So in 2022, supported by the JNCC, we conducted our first volunteer EDI survey. So thank you ever so much to all those that responded to the call at the time to answer the survey. And it also provided an opportunity to review the accessibility of the scheme and possible barriers to engagement. And we now actually have a continuous DEI monitoring questionnaire on the NPMS website at the point of registration. But it's worth mentioning that it's not limited to new folk registering, but actually any existing NPMS volunteers that haven't already completed the short survey, you are able to do so by opting in via your account. So that's just a quick sneaky plug there for anyone happy to answer these few questions. And of course, it's important to, as I say, gather and review volunteer feedback, whether via evaluation forms, following training and events and opportunities, our periodic volunteer feedback surveys, or simply collating feedback received directly via the NPMS support team. And using the information gathered by all these various means and in lines with the aim of the scheme, the NPMS DEI strategy was drawn up in 2023. And I think a gold star does go to NPMS for being ahead of the curve. You may correct me if I'm wrong, Jasmine and Chris, but I believe NPMS was the first of the TPOP partner surveillance schemes to have its own scheme-specific strategy. So what have been the key findings and what are our volunteers telling us? So in 2022, we found out that our volunteers do fall within quite a narrow, actually, demographic, with the vast majority responding that they are white British, mostly in England, and above 55 years of age, with only 2% responding at the time that they considered themselves to be disabled. In terms of their experience, at that time, we found that we largely appeared to be recruiting volunteers from an already engaged audience, with 2/3 already having previous biological recording experience. Of the barriers to involvement that were identified by the respondents, there were some really clear themes, notably around square and site access, mobility, confidence in ID and survey skills. And then, along with informing our own subsequent recommendations, the survey and the feedback from volunteers has been incredibly helpful in gathering suggestions from those participants, those folk out on the ground, on the ways that we may be able to make the scheme more accessible. For example, improved facilitation of volunteers connecting, the provision of more details about the different NPMS squares, and also more informal volunteer events for community building. So what have we done with all of this information? What are we doing beyond informing our strategy? And thinking about what tangible actions have been taken. I'd say that the first thing that we've really been prioritising is getting our house in order. So as I said, it's really important that DEI is threaded throughout our entire work plan, and our programme and activities are really considered and long term. So from the outset, as Chris mentioned, NPMS has included the different survey levels for beginner, intermediate and expert surveyors, which was a deliberate decision made at the development stage to provide monitoring opportunities to volunteers with a range of experience and confidence levels. This is nothing new for the scheme, but I did just want to mention it here because we do see a relatively equal divide between the 3 survey levels. And not only does this show a really lovely mix of experience among the volunteer pool, but it also suggests that volunteers are developing and progressing in confidence, because we see this equal divide despite actually also seeing more new recruits to the scheme starting out at the wildflower level. We're also seeing more volunteers registering, forming groups to take on one or more squares together as a team. We can just see here on the left a lovely picture of the Inverness Botany group, who happened to take on their square together a number of years ago, unprompted, but perhaps unbeknown to them, they actually became one of the forerunners that we have sort of looked to replicate elsewhere where there's been demand. Thinking about other roles that volunteers can take part and get involved with. Our volunteers are a really widely knowledgeable group with a huge range of skills and experiences, and we're really keen to encourage volunteers to use those skills in a flexible way that suits their circumstances. So from those wishing to take part but they're currently unable to access an NPMS square, to keen botanists with bundles of enthusiasm but limited time. And in recent years, the volunteering offer of the NPMS has grown with the addition of the new volunteers we can see here. This includes our lovely NPMS photography volunteers, who are helping us to build a library of high quality species and habitat images, which we use in a whole number of ways, including our volunteer comms, reporting, on our website, and actually really clear ID feature images have been incredibly helpful to assist during training too. We're lucky enough to have some really beautiful images in our image library, but I won't give any more spoilers because I believe we're going to see some in the next session. The vast majority of NPMS survey volunteers enter and submit their own data, but for a handful of volunteers that isn't possible, and each year we do still receive a number of recording forms with really valuable data that we want to make sure is captured. So we now also have developed desk-based volunteer roles to make sure that the efforts of those unable to enter their own data is included. And this role for those volunteers offers a flexible and desk-based opportunity to take part, to gain experience, perhaps with data handling, and also to access the range of further opportunities. We have our NPMS data verification volunteers, who are expert botanists, and this provides an opportunity to contribute to the scheme all throughout the year, even those that aren't able to survey in field. And more creative ways volunteers are contributing to the scheme by using their volunteer voices. So representation is, of course, a really important part of making the scheme inclusive and welcoming. And efforts have been made to introduce and share more volunteer voices through our communications, including our newsletters, our blogs, thinking about our annual reports, and hearing from volunteers with varied experiences from across the country. The Botany Through Art section, as an example of our newsletter, has got some really, really lovely feedback. It tends to incorporate volunteers' pieces. It's been very popular, and along with actually the trialled botanical art, nature journaling and photography workshops that we've conducted during the winter months. And these transferable and field skill sessions through the winter have been not just a delight to run, to maintain contact and engagement with the volunteer community through the down season, but also just to see and hear from these skilled and knowledgeable volunteers about their own interests and their own ways of connecting to nature, the landscapes around them, and indeed their sites. We've seen a number of updates to the website infrastructure and functionality over the years. As per the recommendations I mentioned previously from volunteers, actually, we now house more detailed square information against our NPMS squares for better allocation decisions. So existing or potential NPMS volunteers can now see information about whether a square has previously been surveyed. If it has, where the plots are. They can find out about any overlapping major landowner boundaries and nature reserves. If it has been previously surveyed, they can even see what species have been recorded in that square and any associated images. And as I say, that was born out of feedback from volunteers, and it has made a great difference for both new and existing volunteers, as well as, in fact, for us on the NPMS support team. Work has also been undertaken to identify and generate actually additional map layers for square summary pages for accessibility features. So things like public transport access points, thinking about the length of road within a square, public footpaths, difficult terrain and elevation. They're not live yet, but we are, fingers crossed, planning that they will be live on the NPMS website maps over the winter period. And this was based on advice through disability awareness training, the aim being to empower and to help potential volunteers to make an informed decision about which squares are suitable for adoption. You can see here, as a result again of volunteer feedback, we have developed the website and the user accounts to aid facilitation of volunteer buddying. That's for those keen to link up with local fellow volunteers. And buddying here refers to enabling that contact, whether to jointly conduct surveys, to share effort, or even to share transport options, to learn from more experienced botanists, or just simply to benefit from peer support. Volunteers can now update their account to indicate whether they're interested in linking with other volunteers via an optional checkbox on their account. Only partner staff is actually able to see if you have indicated that interest, but it really helps to support the team to more quickly and efficiently support volunteers who approach them looking for opportunities, something that we're receiving more frequently. It's a self-led activity managed by the volunteers themselves. So if this is something that volunteers are interested in, please do visit and update your account preferences so that we know, because you never know, there may be a volunteer around the corner looking to team up and share the effort. It's really important that scheme volunteers are able to easily find and access the whole range of training opportunities and resources available to them. And so both the training events pages and our online resources page have seen a redesign and revamp to improve navigation, information display, and ultimately make searching for and finding out about these opportunities easier and easier to book. The online training resources page also provides a hub of evergreen training content in different formats for volunteers to access and use at their own time as needed. And we're really looking forward to developing this area of the website further. In recent years, the recordings of our live online webinars are also uploaded to the NPMS Support YouTube channel, just as today's talks will be, for folk to follow along and view in their own time and at their own pace. And this has proved incredibly popular, actually, with the channel having amassed an absolutely astonishing 57,000 views just since the addition of our online training opportunities in 2020. So that's not even across the whole 10 years of the scheme. We're currently developing more comprehensive access permissions toolkit, incorporating FAQs for landowners and a more accessible scheme flyer to accompany these letters. We also have a bilingual Welsh and English template letter for requesting landowner access permission in Wales, and we are now planning to host our first Welsh medium NPMS training course at some point in 2026. Lots of good things going on. We're always consistently reviewing our annual training programme and feedback from participants. NPMS support staff and Plantlife staff training with WESL, a disability awareness organisation, has been so helpful in this, both for in-field and online events. For example, considering venue, site or online platform accessibility, travel needs, amenities, resources and activities on the day. And also importantly, thinking about the communication of that information, both during the booking details and joining details stage, so that volunteers can make an informed decision as to whether to join, or they feel they're encouraged to get in touch if they do have any specific queries or accessibility considerations. We've continued to offer a number of training sessions online to allow more folk to engage that way. But this is, of course, an ever-developing area, and we've got lots of further work planned on our training provisions and the complementary resources. We're really keen to work with our volunteers to best plan training and support that meets their needs. And that's particularly important as a recent study conducted by Plantlife on the impact of NPMS volunteer training showed that training does encourage engagement and volunteer retention, with trained volunteers more likely to conduct and submit surveys over multiple years, and they're less likely to drop away from the scheme. And along with making sure our house and our infrastructure is in order, the partnership has also made efforts with more focused DEI activities and projects, such as rolling out promotion of the scheme to students via university, and a more recent pilot study underway in Northern Ireland, supported by the Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland, to pre-set up NPMS squares with a view of then handing them over ready-made, as it were, to volunteers, thus removing some of those barriers around permission requests, locating plots and getting started. Also shown here, the NPMS alongside the JNCC and other TPOT partners are collaborating with the Yorkshire Consortium of Equity in Doctoral Education to improve access to postgraduate research for people of colour, and through the NERC-funded Careers Pilot Project. So Careers here stands for Citizen Science for Advancing Racial Equity in Environmental Research Super Consortium. Wow, it's a long title. I'm glad they've shortened it to Careers. The environmental workforce lacks ethnic diversity at every level, and Careers have been successful in receiving an initial 9-month funding from NERC to scope out and pilot approaches to inspire and enable people of colour to be part of the future talent pipeline. And we actually have our first plant monitoring student engagement day Wednesday, and we very much look forward to learning from the participants involved. So as you can probably tell, I could talk all day about our commitment to DEI, communication and the co-production approach within the NPMS to help maximise our volunteer experience and ultimately our monitoring efforts. But I'm going to leave it now there, with a big thank you again for being part of the journey and for being such a wonderful and enthusiastic community to share these goals with.